have you ever had a moment where you quietly asked yourself, is this really how my life is supposed to be now? It's a question that doesn't come with trumpets or alarms. It comes in the stillness, often when you're alone in a room that doesn't feel like yours, surrounded by walls that echo silence more than comfort. This was the moment Eleanor had the first night in her nursing home room. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of medical carts and muffled footsteps. The sheets were clean, the lighting soft, the staff kind, but something was missing. Something that no amount of amenities could replace. She had raised 3 children, survived 2 wars, buried a husband, and spent her 70s tending roses and reading poetry under an old oak tree behind her home in Maine. She had lived fully. And yet, here she was, 74 years old, lying in a bed someone else had made for her, wondering if she'd just signed away the last real piece of her freedom. Eleanor never planned on moving into a nursing home. In fact, like many seniors, she had quietly promised herself that she never would. She was independent, sharp, and proud of her autonomy. But life, as it often does, threw a curveball. After a minor fall in the kitchen, just a slip on spilled tea, her children grew alarmed. There was talk of risk, of safety, of needing constant care. And though she resisted at first, their concern wore her down. They weren't wrong, after all. She had fallen. What if it happened again? The brochures showed happy seniors smiling in sunlit gardens, playing chess and enjoying community dinners. The rooms were private, clean, and climate-controlled. The activities calendar was full. Her daughter called it a beautiful community. Her son said it would give her peace of mind. And so, after a long sigh, she said yes. What Eleanor didn't realize that day, what so many seniors never realize, is that the loss doesn't happen all at once. It's quiet. It's cumulative. And it starts the moment your life begins operating on someone else's schedule. The first morning she woke up to a knock instead of a sunrise. Breakfast in 15 minutes, Eleanor, the nurse chirped. Eleanor blinked at the ceiling. She had always woken up slowly. Tea first, then a quiet hour with her books. But here, everything moved fast. Efficiently. Predictably. The structure, while well-meaning, felt more like a factory line than a home. Meals were preset. Lights out by 9 p.m. TV off by 10. Showers on Mondays and Thursdays. Want to take a walk outside? You'd need someone to escort you. Want to eat a later dinner? Not possible. Her life, once full of small personal choices, had been packaged into time blocks. This brings us to the first hard truth. The quiet loss of independence. Eleanor thought she'd just be getting help when she needed it. Instead, she found herself needing permission for things she'd once done without thinking. What to wear. When to eat. Where she could go. And while the staff were kind and well-trained, they were overworked. Her requests often became afterthoughts. Small things, like asking for an extra blanket or choosing her own tea, became logistical tasks. That loss was more painful than she'd expected. Because independence, for older adults, is more than just movement. It's identity. In one of our recent community polls, over 70% of viewers over age 65 said that losing control of their daily choices was their greatest fear, not illness, not even death. Because when you lose that, it feels like you're no longer steering your life, you're simply being carried by someone else's current. And for Eleanor, that current swept away more than just her schedule. It began to affect her sense of self. Which brings us to the second hard truth. The unexpected emotional isolation. You might think that being surrounded by people, nurses, caregivers, other residents, would protect you from loneliness. But Eleanor soon discovered that being surrounded isn't the same as being connected. The other residents were kind, but most were dealing with memory loss or physical limitation that made deep conversation difficult. She missed her friends. She missed chatting with her neighbor over the fence about the weather. She missed being needed, being part of something, of family dinners, community gatherings, even the chaos of grandchildren fighting over dessert. Inside the home, the energy was quiet. Too quiet. Like the hum of a refrigerator you stop noticing until the power goes out. Days blurred together. Meals arrived like clockwork. Nurses came and went with polite efficiency. But Eleanor, once a storyteller, a homemaker, a woman full of quiet elderly wisdom, felt invisible. One afternoon, while sitting in the community room flipping through a dog-eared gardening magazine, she wrote in her notebook, "I'm not unhappy. But I don't feel alive. That scares me." This is one of those elderly reflections people rarely talk about. The grief of still being here, but not really being seen. And when that feeling stretches out over weeks and months, it begins to gnaw at your sense of purpose. If you've spent decades building a life, maintaining a home, caring for others, it's not easy to suddenly become the one who is cared for. That's why Eleanor's third truth hit her the hardest, the erosion of dignity. It wasn't just about being helped into the shower or having someone do her laundry. It was the constant sense that she was being managed. Spoken to like a patient. Talked about like a chart. She overheard a staff member refer to her as room 204 one day. It stung. She wanted to scream, "I am not a room number. I am Eleanor Davis. I used to volunteer at the public library. I baked cookies for every child on this block for 30 years. But no one asked. So she didn't say." This is what's often lost in conversations about senior health. We talk about medications, mobility, and fall prevention. But we don't talk about the soul. The spirit. The burning human need to feel valuable. So Eleanor began writing again. Journaling her thoughts. And slowly, those pages became a lifeline. A way to hear her own voice in a place where she felt unheard. She wrote down stories about her husband, who passed in his sleep after 47 years of marriage. She wrote about the day she caught her youngest daughter sneaking a kitten into the house. She wrote about the roses she'd planted from cuttings in 1978 that still bloomed every June. And in those pages, she remembered something important. She was still her. She hadn't disappeared. That, perhaps, is the most powerful truth of all. And the one we'll carry with us into the next part of her story. There's a moment that Eleanor still remembers clearly, even now. It was a Tuesday afternoon, just past 3, and the sun was pouring through the big window in the common room. She had been waiting for a visit from her daughter, something they'd planned days earlier, but when the clock passed 4 and no one came, something inside her shifted. She didn't feel angry. Just invisible. That's one of the hardest things about aging that no one really prepares you for. You can still feel so alive, so full of thoughts, memories, and desires, but somehow the world starts treating you like you're fading. Eleanor's experience in the nursing home wasn't abusive. The people weren't cruel. But it was the slow erosion of her identity that stung the most. The way decisions were made for her. The way she was referred to as a resident, not by name. The way people assumed she had nothing left to say. This brings us to the next hard truth, loss of personal dignity. Eleanor had always taken pride in her appearance. She wore soft blouses, simple jewelry, and always kept her hair neat. But in the nursing home, she began to notice how hard it was to preserve that part of herself. Her shower times were scheduled. Her clothes were often washed and folded by others. She had to ask for help with small, private tasks, things she had always done herself without thinking. For many seniors, dignity isn't about grand gestures. It's about the ability to maintain the little rituals that make you feel like you. When those are stripped away, even with good intentions, it begins to chip away at your spirit. Eleanor felt it in the quiet ways. When a nurse spoke over her instead of to her, or when her favorite blouse was replaced with a generic hospital gown. Now let me pause and say this, none of this is to shame the people who work in these homes. Many are kind, dedicated, and stretched thin. But what often gets lost in the system is the individual. The person. The soul that still longs to be seen and heard. That's why these kinds of elderly reflections matter so much. Because they remind us that aging isn't just a medical condition to manage. It's a stage of life filled with complexity, humanity, and the right to be treated with respect. Eleanor, like so many others, started asking herself a painful question. Have I become a burden? Which brings us to another hard truth: strained family dynamics. When she first moved into the home, her children visited often. They brought flowers, her favorite snacks, even her dog once or twice. But slowly, the visits stretched out. Life got busy. Her kids assumed she was being cared for, and they stopped calling as much. What hurt wasn't their absence, it was the feeling that she had been outsourced. That her care, her company, her wisdom, had been passed along to professionals, as if her family no longer needed her. That's one of the toughest life lessons from the elderly, realizing that the relationships you spent decades building might shift in ways you didn't expect. Eleanor wasn't bitter. But she did begin to realize that emotional closeness can't be replaced by scheduled visits. This period of reflection brought Eleanor something she hadn't anticipated: a renewed sense of motivation. She didn't want to stay passive. She didn't want to let the days blend into each other like beige wallpaper. She started journaling again. She reread her old books. She asked one of the aides to bring her watercolor paints, something she hadn't touched in years. And with each stroke of color on the page, she remembered who she was. Not a patient, not a number, but a woman who had lived, loved, created, and survived. In a quiet, powerful way, she began reclaiming herself. That is the elderly wisdom we so often overlook. That it's never too late to fight for your inner light. That the body may slow down, but the soul still dances. Her small acts of resistance weren't dramatic, but they were bold. She asked to choose her own meal times. She requested to skip bingo for a walk in the garden. She wrote to her daughter, not to complain, but to say, "I miss your voice. Can we talk more, even just for a few minutes?" And slowly, things started to shift. Her daughter began visiting again, shorter visits, but more honest ones. The staff noticed her spark returning. Other residents saw her reading, painting, humming quietly at dinner, and they began joining her. This is what senior health really looks like. Not just stable blood pressure or cholesterol levels, but emotional vitality. A sense of connection. The feeling that life is still yours. Eleanor's story isn't rare. It's just rarely told. Because we don't talk enough about the emotional cost of institutional care. The subtle loss of freedom. The grief that comes from giving up your home, your routines, your privacy. But we should. Not because nursing homes are bad, but because no decision about your future should be made without full awareness of what it means. That's what inspiration really is, isn't it? The courage to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The willingness to listen, even when it hurts. The ability to grow, even when the world expects you to shrink. And if Eleanor could sit beside you right now, she'd probably hold your hand, look you in the eye, and say something like this: "Don't let anyone decide for you what your last chapters should look like. You still have a say. You still matter." And she'd be right. One morning, Eleanor sat by the window in her room with a cup of tea, the same way she had done every morning for years. But that day felt different. There was a certain stillness, not just outside, but within her. She had spent months adjusting to this new life, mourning the things she had lost, discovering the pieces she could reclaim. And in that quiet, she realized something powerful. Maybe the greatest kind of freedom in aging is not about where you live, but how you choose to live wherever you are. That brings us to the final and perhaps hardest truth: you can feel forgotten, even when you're being cared for. It's something not written in the brochures, not talked about in care plan meetings. But it's real. People check your vitals. They bring your meals. They make sure you're safe. But no one asks how your heart is doing. No one asks what dreams you still carry, what memories still make you smile, what regrets still linger like soft shadows. For many seniors, the body is watched, but the soul is left alone. Eleanor felt it deeply. At times, she felt like she had become a task list, a name on a clipboard. She didn't blame anyone, but she longed to be seen. Not as someone who needed help, but as someone who had lived. That's where the life lessons from the elderly shine their brightest. Because when you've been through war, love, loss, and quiet victories, you don't just want to be looked after, you want to be heard. She began keeping a journal, not just of her days, but of her thoughts. She wrote about her late husband's laugh, about the smell of fresh laundry on spring mornings, about the way her mother used to sing while folding bedsheets. These tiny moments, captured in ink, became her way of keeping her humanity intact. And over time, that journal became more than therapy, it became legacy. Because that's what we forget sometimes. Every senior is a library. A living archive of wisdom, stories, and insight. And when we listen, really listen, we unlock a treasure more valuable than any medicine. Eleanor shared her journal with a volunteer who visited the home every Sunday. A college student named Lily, who had lost her own grandmother the year before. Week by week, page by page, their conversations became something beautiful. Not just an exchange between generations, but a reminder of what true inspiration looks like. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's the gentle hand of someone who has lived long enough to know what matters, and who chooses to pass that knowledge on. And that, my friend, is elderly wisdom in its purest form. As the seasons changed, Eleanor stopped waiting for her life to return to what it had been. Instead, she built something new, right where she was. She advocated for more flexible meal options. She started a weekly poetry group. She requested music in the mornings, and organized a memory-sharing circle every Thursday, where each resident could tell a story from their past. It wasn't about fixing everything. It was about finding motivation in the smallest corners of her world, and letting that be enough. Her health didn't magically improve. She still needed assistance with some tasks. But something had shifted on a deeper level. She felt more grounded, more connected, more like herself. That, in the end, is what real senior health looks like. It's not just blood pressure or cholesterol numbers. It's emotional strength, mental clarity, a sense of purpose. It's waking up with something to look forward to, even if it's as simple as a conversation or a sunrise. So here's what Eleanor would want you to know. If you're standing at the edge of this decision, if you're wondering whether a nursing home is right for you, or for someone you love, don't rush. Don't choose out of fear. Ask the hard questions. Visit the place. Talk to the staff. Talk to the residents. Imagine yourself there, not just surviving, but living. And if you feel something inside you say this doesn't feel right, listen. Because one of the most powerful elderly reflections is this: your comfort matters. Your joy matters. And your instincts, they're wiser than you think. If a nursing home feels like the best option, great. But if your heart says, I want to try something else, know that there are alternatives. Home care, community living, moving in with family, or simply adjusting your home for better safety. You are not a burden. You are a blessing. And the people who truly love you will want to walk this decision with you, not make it for you. To every senior out there watching, your voice still matters. Your choices still matter. And your life, no matter your age, still holds meaning. You don't have to settle. You don't have to disappear. You don't have to hand your future over to someone else's plan. You have more power than you've been told. More wisdom than you've been asked to share. More time than you think. So take that next step, whatever it is, with clarity, courage, and care. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to know. Have you or someone you love experienced something similar? What does home really mean to you in this stage of life? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let this be more than a video, let it be a conversation. Because when seniors share their truth, they light the way for others. And if this message moved you even a little, please click like, subscribe, and share it with someone who may need it. Here's to freedom, to dignity, to aging with heart. See you in the next story. Stay strong.